Tonight, we travel back thousands of years to the banks of the Nilinto, the heart of a civilization known for its pyramids, its pharaohs, and its gods who never stopped watching. But behind the gold masks and grand temples lies a reality far less forgiving. What would it be like to live just one day in ancient Egypt? The answer: brutal. The sun isn't the only thing that can roast you alive. Before you even open your eyes, heat is already invading. The sun blasts through your reed-walled hut like a divine judgment. There's no glass, no shade, no protection, just light, dry and punishing, bleeding in from every crack. You're lying on a straw mat, tangled in a linen sheet that's more decorative than useful. The Nile breeze those documentaries talked about, it's gone, probably retired around 2800 BCE. Stepping outside feels like entering a clay oven. The temperature is already brushing against 90 degrees F, 32 degrees Celsius, and it's not even mid-morning. The sun doesn't shine, Heret scorches. Your linen tunic? Useless. It clings to your skin like wet tissue in a sauna. There's no sunscreen, no aloe vera, no wide-brimmed hat with a resort logo. Ancient Egyptians had oils, but unless you're wealthy or work in a temple, you're out of luck. The best alternative? Smearing yourself with mud or crocodile dung. It might offer some protection. Maybe. By midday, the stones beneath your feet are hot enough to cook lentils. Shade is rare. Trees are a luxury. You might find some brief relief behind a sweating mud brick wall, but you're still baking. Your skin feels like it's been dipped in hot clay, your limbs pulsing with heat fatigue. And don't complain, Ra, the sun god is watching. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't just the weather. It was power, divine power. The hotter it gets, the more glorious Ra is feeling. If you're melting, it's considered a spiritual compliment. Surviving one day in ancient Egypt requires water, humility, and the stamina of a roast chicken that refuses to die. And that's just the morning. Eventually, you rise if your scorched body lets you and head for the Nile. It's nearby, which sounds promising until you get close enough to smell it. Yes, the sacred Nile, reason Egypt exists at all, currently reeks like a swampy fish market in the middle of a bad breakup. The banks are alive with flies, frogs, and things that shouldn't have legs, but do. This is where you bathe. Soap doesn't exist. Even if it did, you wouldn't own any. Instead, you lather up with what ancient Egyptians considered cutting-edge hygiene: sand. You exfoliate with coarse grains and call it skincare. It's like rubbing gravel on a sunburn. Washing clothes? Also done here. By washing, we mean hammering fabric against stones while praying that a crocodile doesn't mistake your laundry for lunch. And let's not forget the Nile's other generous contributions: sewage runoff, dead animals, the occasional corpse. Everyone, people, animals, funeral, barges, they all use the same river. Somehow, this is still considered clean. If you live in Memphis or Thebes, you might have access to a public basin. If not, it's Nile or nothing. And privacy? A myth. Bathing here means sharing space with neighbors, livestock, and the occasional ibis pecking around your ankles like it pays rent. You fill jars with water, balance them on your head, and head home before the heat turns your mud brick house into toast. You're technically cleaner, but only marginally less worried about parasites. You've sandpapered yourself semi-smooth, and now feel like a soggy, sun-dried fig. Time for breakfast. Now forget everything you know about breakfast. No eggs Benedict, no fruit bowls, no iced lattes. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is tactical, refueling, nothing more. You squat in a corner, or sit on a low stool if you're lucky. The main dish? Bread. Lots of it. Dense, coarse, and often as chewy as an old sandal. Made from emmer wheat or barley, it's baked in communal clay oven softened, shared with local rats. Expect sand in every bite, not a seasoning, just an uninvited gift from the grinding stones. Consider it your daily mineral intake. Then comes the beer. Don't get excited. This isn't crisp elites, cloudy, lukewarm liquid bread. more porridge than pint, slightly fermented. Children drink it, not for fun, but because it's safer than Nile water. The brewing process at least kills some parasites. If you're lucky, and that's a big if, you might get an onion or a few dried dates. Protein? Only if someone caught a fish and didn't immediately eat it raw. You eat your grain slab and sip your sour sludge while swatting flies that treat your breakfast like an open buffet. Breakfast here isn't about pleasure. It's fuel, function, bare minimum survival, and probably the best meal you'll have all day. You've had your gritty bread, your chunky beer, and just enough rest to call yourself operational. Time to work. And in ancient Egypt, work makes modern burnout look like a spa retreat. You're not a scribe. You're not royalty. You're not a priest. That means your job is dust, muscle, and endless motion. No coffee breaks, no ergonomic chairs, no ventilation, just labor. If you're a farmer, you're in the fields by sunrise, ankle deep in Nile mud, pulling weeds, planting barley. An overseer watches you work like it's his full-time job to yell, "Your tools," wooden plows, crude sickles, your own hands. If your back aches, you're doing it right. If you're a laborer, it gets biblical. You're hauling stones that weigh more than a small horse. For temples, for tombs, barefoot, up ramps made of gravel and prayer. Trip and fall? That's a broken ankle and a shrug from the foreman. Tomb work is another level of pain. You're hammering limestone, carving burial chambers for the rich and divine people who will get to rest longer than you ever will. And if you mess up the pharaoh's tomb, best case, you're fired. Worst case, sealed in with a curse. If you're a woman, your job is just as physical. Grinding grain, weaving linen, hauling water, cooking, raising kids, helping in the fields. Your only break? When the baby naps. For 7 minutes, and you still have to stir the stew while swatting mosquitoes. You eat standing up. You sweat through your tunic. You never stop. Because slowing down means falling behind. Falling behind means your quota slips. And if your quota slips, someone else eats and you don't. There's no clock. The sun is your manager. When it finally sinks below the horizon, you stumble home-dust-caked, half alive, dreaming of shade, sandals, and a slightly less aggressive sun god. Work in ancient Egypt isn't a job. It's a sentence, a full-body commitment to survival, repeated until your body breaks or your overseer decides you're not worth feeding. And that's still not the worst of it. After grinding yourself to dust in the fields or hammering your soul out in a tomb, you might feel tempted to mutter something under your breath. A little, "This job sucks," or "Why am I doing this?" Stop. Right there. Because in ancient Egypt, complaining isn't just unwise, it's dangerous. Not just socially, spiritually, legally, existentially. Why? Because your boss isn't just a man, he's a god. The pharaoh isn't a king by title, he's a living deity. The embodiment of Horus, son of Ra, a divine avatar sent to preserve Ma'at, universal balance of truth, justice, and cosmic order. His face is carved on every wall. His name is etched into bread molds and shouted in daily rituals. He's not elected. He's not questioned. He is the will of the heavens in human form. If the river floods, praise the pharaoh. If it doesn't, maybe you weren't reverent enough. Doubting him isn't just impolite. It's blasphemy. Dangerous. Floggable. Possibly fatal blasphemy. Speak ill of him, and your next address might be a pit in the desert. Without a proper burial, without a name, without a soul. In Egypt, erasure is worse than death. And no, you'll never see him. The closest you'll get is watching his golden boat float by during a holy procession. Blink, and he's gone back behind palace walls, guarded by priests, scribes, soldiers, and wealth enough to feed 100 villages. If you're lucky enough to work on a royal projected tomb, a statue, a temple, you do it with a smile. Or at least you fake it. Because pretending you're honored to sweat under the pharaoh's name is safer than telling the truth. The alternative? Pain, shackles, maybe a sealed tomb of your own. Don't even think about rebellion. Rebellions get crushed before the dust settles. Villages disappear. Whole family lines vanish from record. History doesn't remember traitors in Egypt. It deletes them. The pharaoh is divine. You're lucky to be alive enough to sweat in his name. Now, get back to work. And just when you thought your enemy was the heat, the labor, the divine tyranny, another foe emerges. Sand. In ancient Egypt, sand is not a backdrop. It's a character, a co-worker, a parasite, a seasoning, a curse. It is everywhere. In your tunic, in your bedding, in your food. It slips into your nose while you sleep and rubs against your skin until you feel flayed. You walk, you work, you breathe, and sand joins you. Linen, only fabric anyone wears, is breathable, yes. But it blocks sand about as well as a fishing net. It slides down your collar, creeps into your armpits, and finds folds you didn't know your body had. You chew bread, and there's grit in every bite. That's not poor baking, it's unavoidable. Flour is ground between stone slabs, and the result is a generous helping of millstone in every meal. Your molars, worn flat before you're 30. Dental remains from ancient Egypt often show teeth ground down like river rocks. Eating is also dental work. Every day. Your house isn't safe either. Made of mud brick, it's full of cracks, crevices, holes, perfect entry points for sand on the wind. Your floor is covered. Your cooking pots are full. Your bed is basically a sandbox with a sheet on top. Most people go barefoot. If you're lucky, you might have sandals made of woven reeds. Stylish? Maybe. Protective? Barely. One sharp rock, and you're hobbling. And sandals offer no resistance to the sandstorm about to punch you in the face. Because yes, Egypt has sandstorms. Fast, blinding, throat-drying. 1 second you're walking through the market. The next you're coughing up dunes, while your eyes feel like someone threw powdered glass in them. Visibility, 0. Everyone around you becomes a blurry silhouette with lungs full of grit. Sand is not just a nuisance, it's a presence. It invades, it erodes, it wears you down. You don't wash it off, you surrender to it. You are part sand now. And as if God's work and sand weren't enough, everything you do is tied to ritual. In ancient Egypt, religion is not a weekend hobby. It's the code behind reality. It's your calendar, your job description, your insurance policy, and your afterlife passport. Every action, every meal, every breath is observed by something divine. Your town probably has a dozen temples to different gods, each responsible for some slice of existence. Ra drives the sun across the sky. Thoth governs wisdom and moon cycles. Sobek, part crocodile, part horror story, guards the Nile. Bastet, the cat goddess, watches over homes and fertility. Each one has rules, moods, rituals. You wake up, thank Ra. You spill some beer, whisper to Hathor. You stub your toe, curse carefully, or risk summoning a spirit with a grudge. Before meals, you offer a pinch of food to the gods. Before sleep, you hope Set, god of chaos, doesn't decide to flip your life upside down. Funerals aren't events, they're odysseys. Death is just the beginning. In the afterlife, your heart is weighed against the feather of Ma, truth and order. If it's heavier, if you lied, stole, or muttered the wrong thing at the wrong time, your soul is eaten. Literally, by a monstrous fusion of crocodile, lion, and hippo. No reincarnation, no peace, just oblivion. The good news? If you live justly and honored the gods, you get to spend eternity in the field of Ritsa utopia, where everything you loved in life continues, just without the hunger, heat, or sand. Presumably. But the richer you are, the more help you get. Priests, spells, elaborate tombs, magical scrolls like the Book of the Deida, spiritual cheat sheet for the underworld. The poor, they pray harder and hope the gods are in a generous mood. Because in ancient Egypt, faith isn't optional. It's your full-time occupation. And when something goes wrong, an illness, an injury, a mysterious rash, your salvation lies somewhere between medicine and mysticism. You seek out a healer. And to be fair, Egyptian doctors are some of the best of the ancient world. They understand anatomy, have surgical tools, and medical papyri filled with case studies. But science is never alone here. Every remedy comes with a spell. You get a paste made of honey, moldy bread, and crushed herbs. It's surprisingly effective. Honey is antibacterial, and the mold contains penicillin-like compounds. But before application, the healer chants an incantation to chase off evil spirits. A headache? Onion paste on the scalp plus. A hymn. Chest pain? Cow dung mixed with dates. Eye infection? A little beer. A little lizard blood. A prayer to Horus. Surgery? It exists. Abscesses drained. Bones set. Wounds stitched. Anesthesia? None. You grip something hard, scream into a pillow, and try not to black out. Teeth are worse. Thanks to sand-filled bread, most Egyptians have worn down, infected teeth by their 20s. If it gets bad, you either live with it, die from it, or have it yanked out with iron tongs forged by a blacksmith who probably also makes weapons. No visit ends without an amulet, for protection, for luck, for warding off the invisible snake wrapped around your spleen, because sometimes it's not an infection, it's a curse. Egyptian medicine wasn't blind, it was just broad. It treated the body, the spirit, and the invisible forces in between. And it worked, sometimes. Here's a surprise most people don't expect. Ancient Egyptian women had more legal rights than women in many later civilizations. They could own property, initiate divorce, run businesses, and even take men to court. On paper, that sounds progressive, almost futuristic. But before you start daydreaming about a time-traveling girl boss vacation, stop, because paper rights don't change daily reality. If you're a woman in ancient Egypt, you're up before sunrise, not to sip tea or stretch, but to work. First task, grinding grain by hand, crouched over a flat stone that wears down your flour and your spine. Then you're off to haul water from the Nile, cook for the family, care for children, feed animals, and if needed, join your husband in the fields. You're a one-woman workforce wrapped in linen. There are no days off, no maternity leave, no downtime. Your only break? When the baby naps, and even then, you're cooking one-handed and swatting flies with the other. Childbirth is a raw, dangerous process. There's no anesthesia, no sanitation. Midwives exist, but their tools are prayer, incense, and experience to note antiseptic or medicine. You give birth in a hot room, surrounded by chants and sweat and the hope that nothing goes wrong. Fashion? Functional. You wear a straight linen dress, often sleeveless, held up with straps if you're lucky. There's no underwear, no socks. Sandals, maybe, if your family can afford them. Bugs crawl over your skin as easily as the sun scorches it. And cosmetics, yes, they exist, but they're lead-based and applied with sticks. The eyeliner may be iconic, but it's toxic. If you're born rich, the picture changes. You might learn to read, manage estate accounts, become a priestess. If you're royal, you might become pharaoh-like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra. But if you're poor, your reality is physical. You work, you bleed, you grind, you endure. Yet Egyptian women still had agency. They weren't owned, they weren't voiceless, they could inherit property. Their marriages were contracts, not chains. In a world where many women were treated as objects, that mattered. It didn't make life easier, but it made them visible. You make it through the day. You've eaten your sandy bread, trudged through labor, avoided divine wrath, and maybe escaped a sandstorm. Now, finally, it's evening. Time to relax? Not quite. In ancient Egypt, your real test begins after you die. Death isn't an ending. It's a bureaucratic obstacle course, a multi-phase cosmic trial with no room for error. First, your soul must make its way to the Hall of Ma'at, where you're judged before a tribunal of 42 divine beings. One by one, you must declare your innocence. I did not lie. I did not steal. I did not covet my neighbor's donkey. Each denial is a spell, and one mistake can end everything. Then comes the heart test. Your literal heart, believed to house your soul, is weighed against a feather. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally weighed. The feather represents ma'a, truth, balance, order. If your heart is heavier, you're done. Your soul is fed to Amita, composite beast, with the jaws of a crocodile, the haunches of a lion, and the bulk of a hippo. No reincarnation, no peace, just annihilation. And it's not just your actions that matter, your words count. Your thoughts. Forget a line, fumble a spell, mispronounce a divine name, gone. The afterlife is earned, not given. But if you pass, you're granted entry to the field of reeds, an eternal paradise, a perfected Egypt without flies, famine, or funerals. You farm without sweat, eat without hunger. Sail the Nile forever under soft, golden light. This is why Egyptians obsessed over death. They planned for it like modern people plan for retirement. If you're rich, you commission a tumor custom-designed eternity suite. You save up for burial goods, jewelry, food, perfumes, furniture. You even order Shabdi Dolstani servant figurines designed to do your chores in the afterlife. Eternal labor delegation. Your body is embalmed, dried with natron salt, wrapped in linen, and sealed inside a painted sarcophagus. You're buried with a copy of the Book of the Dita spiritual field guide, full of passwords, spells, and tips like, don't insult the crocodile god. If you're poor, your tomb is a hole in the sand, maybe a bit of cloth, a jar or two, no murals, no gold, no divine protection, just you and the dirt. Still, even the poorest Egyptian believed in the afterlife. Every Honoric or poor shared the dream of reaching the field of reeds. But that dream doesn't guarantee rest, because even in death, you can be robbed. Tombs are filled with offerings, gold amulets, perfumed oils, furniture, jewelry. Pharaohs are buried with chariots and literal boatloads of treasure, which makes every tomb an invitation to someone with a chisel and desperation. Tomb robbery was a full-time problem. Pharaohs tried to prevent it by building deeper, hiding entrances, engraving terrifying curses. May your soul be devoured by serpents, or may a crocodile twist your limbs forever. Spoiler, the curses didn't work. Grave robbers came anyway, quietly, often with help from inside. Some were locals, some were priests or laborers who had helped build the tombs. Even guards could be bought. The punishment was brutal: public beatings, amputations, execution. But the rewards, especially during famines, were too tempting. Gold, food, tools, even linen could be currency. And it wasn't just royal tombs. Commoners' graves got looted too. A pot of beer, a brick of bread when you're starving, even funerary offerings become survival rations. The irony? Tomb robbing was sometimes driven not by greed, but hunger. So no, death doesn't guarantee peace. Your name can be erased, your corpse unwrapped, your afterlife stolen by the living. Because in ancient Egypt, the most sacred places were also the most vulnerable. And yet, for all its terror, hardship, and heat, the civilization thrived for millennia. Why? Because they believed in something bigger, a cosmic rhythm, a divine order, a purpose that gave every sunrise and every grain of wheat, meaning you wouldn't last a day in ancient Egypt, but they lasted thousands of years. And maybe that's why we're still talking about them. Before the mighty Aztec Empire, before the Maya carved time into stone, there was Teotihuacan, a city so vast, so mysterious, and so powerful that it earned a name from later civilizations, the place where gods were born. And deep within this city past the sprawling Avenue of the Dead. Between pyramids that scrape the sky stands a monument unlike any other, a temple not designed to welcome but to warn. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent. It doesn't reach gently for the heavens like the temples of other ancient cultures. It doesn't humble itself before divine light. This temple stares back. Dozens of stone serpents jut from its surface, mouths open, fangs bared, eyes wide. These aren't ornaments, their threats carved in volcanic rock, symbols of divine rage. And beneath them, something darker was sealed for centuries. Recent excavations beneath the temple uncovered not just offerings but hundreds of human remains. Over 200 young men, many decapitated, hands bound, warriors perhaps, turned sacrifices. Their bodies arranged deliberately, geometrically ritual death engineered with mathematical precision. Some were buried with obsidian blades, others with necklaces made from human teeth. These weren't hurried burials. This wasn't chaos. It was a masaja statement to the gods, and to every soul in Teotihuacan. The temple was more than a place of worship. It was a cosmic transaction sealed with blood, a divine power plant fueled by life. The city behind it was immense. At its peak, between 100 and 250 CE, Teotihuacan held over 100 people, making it one of the largest cities on earth, as large as ancient Rome, as planned as Chang'an, as influential as Alexandria. Streets were laid in a precise grid. Massive apartment complexes, lined boulevards, multi-story structures, pyramid temples. And at the center, the pyramid of the sun, the pyramid of the moon, and the temple of the feathered serpent. But here's the mystery. We don't know who built it. No king's name, no royal inscriptions, no written language that's been deciphered. The people of Teotihuacan left behind one of the greatest cities in human history without a clear signature. No ego, no biography, just the architecture of power and fear. And yet, their influence stretched far. Maya cities like Tikal and Copan bear traces of Teotihuacan culture: obsidian blades, murals, political shifts. Some historians believe Teotihuacan emissaries helped install kings in foreign lands, without an army, just presence, just awe. How? Through architecture, through ritual, through symbolism that made it clear. Teotihuacan was not just a city, it was the axis of the world. At the center of that axis stood their most enigmatic deity, the feathered serpent, later known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. But in Teotihuacan, centuries before the Aztecs, this figure already ruled in stone and shadow. The symbolism is cosmic, a serpent earthbound, deadly, primal, a birdski dwelling, divine, untouchable. To merge them is to merge opposites, death and life, earth and air, chaos and balance. The feathered serpent is not just a god, he is a bridge between realms, and at his temple, the cost of that connection was human life. Myths suggest he once descended into the underworld to gather bones and create humankind. But even then, it came at a cost. The gods sacrificed themselves for creation. In return, humans were expected to offer their own lives. And that expectation, it was met. Beneath the temple of the feathered serpent, layer after layer of sacrificial chambers were discovered. Bodies buried in patterns that mirrored the cosmos: north, south, east, west, with offerings of jaguar bones, serpents, shells, knives, figurines. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't war. It was a ritual foundation. These victims weren't dumped. They were embedded into the temple itself like sacred bricks of flesh and bone. To build for the gods, you first fed them. And as archaeologists dug deeper, the horror only deepened. Tunnels beneath the temple revealed mercury liquid metal shimmering in darkened chambers, mica-lined walls that sparkled like starlight. A man-made underworld, glittering and toxic, meant to mimic the night sky or the river of souls beneath the earth. The temple wasn't built over the dead. It was built around them. Every sacrifice, every serpent head, every shimmering tunnel was part of a greater design. And that design wasn't random. Teotihuacan's layout followed celestial alignment. The Avenue of the Dead runs at a 15-degree angle off true north. Not an error, a choice. Some believe it points to the setting of the Pleiades, or Venus celestial bodies, sacred to Mesoamerican mythology. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent sits directly on this axis, locked into a cosmic clock. Venus in particular held deep meaning, It was a planet of war, sacrifice, and rebirth. When it rose, people watched. When it vanished, they bled. The temple's structure, its dimensions, its symmetry, its alignment wasn't just aesthetic. It was astronomical theology. The entire city was a sacred engine meant to reflect the heavens. The temple was a calendar, a weapon, and an altar, all in one. It served its rulers not just with awe, but with fear. Visitor envoys from other cities would arrive, pass through the Avenue of the Dead, and stop. Because in front of this temple, there was no posturing, no rivaling, just stone serpents, cosmic geometry, and the faint smell of blood baked into the stones. To rule Teotihuacan was to embody the gods. The priests and leaders performed sacrifices not in private, but in public. This was political theater. With obsidian blades, feathered headdresses, and smoke, they turned fear into control. The gods demanded blood. The rulers delivered. From the top tiers, they looked down on the city, the plaza below, a sea of eyes turned upward, all watching, all reminded who controlled the order of stars, rain, and life. Teotihuacan didn't need armies to conquer. Its architecture did the work. But power, no matter how divine, is never permanent. At its peak, Teotihuacan was unmatched, a city of fire, stone, blood, and order. It breathed through its pyramids. It ruled through its symbols. It aligned itself with the cosmos and dared to speak the language of gods. And then it fell. Not with a single blow, not with an invading army, but with something slower, deeper, a fracture from within. By the mid-6th century, the cracks began to show. Archaeological evidence points to years of drought, failed harvests, internal unrest. The very system that had made Teotihuacan invincible, its rigid centralization, its ritual control, began to collapse under its own weight. Then came the fire. Across the elite compounds, temples, palaces, administrative buildings, charred layers appear, burned walls, shattered sculptures. A wave of destruction targeted not at the city as a whole, but at its rulers, its priests, its gods. Even the temple of the feathered serpent was not spared. It was ransacked, iconography defaced, ritual objects smashed. Fire scorched the walls that had once held the cosmic order in place, and then silence. The residential areas, largely untouched. This wasn't foreign conquest. This was a rebellion, a reckoning. The people who once stood in awe beneath serpent heads may have risen against their masters. Teotihuacan didn't vanish overnight. It lingered, but its soul was gone. The grand rituals stopped. Trade routes dried up. The elite disappeared. The gods, it seemed, had gone quiet. But not forgotten. Centuries later, the Aztecs arrived in the Valley of Mexico and stumbled upon the ruins. They didn't know the builders. They didn't understand the architecture. But they felt its power, its weight, its silence. They named it Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born. They believed it had been built by giants, or gods themselves. They built myths on top of ruins, rituals on top of memories. They repurposed the temples, reinterpreted the symbols, and folded the feathered serpent into their own pantheon. They called him Quetzalcoatl, and in their version, he was no longer a god of sacrifice. He became the bringer of wisdom, the weeping deity, the civilizing force, a god who promised to return. That shift is telling. Myths don't die. They evolve. They absorb the past and reflect new needs. The feathered serpent didn't vanish with Teotihuacan. He transformed. From terrifying engine of cosmic sacrifice to sorrowful god of knowledge, from predator to teacher, from stone to spirit. In modern Mexico, his image still echoes in coins, on murals, in literature, a national symbol, a mystery both ancient and alive. But beneath the admiration, the temple still holds a harder truth. The temple of the feathered serpent wasn't just a monument to faith, it was a weapon of belief. It forces a question. How far will a society go to connect with the divine? The answer is buried in its foundations. Over 200 sacrifices, placed with care, wrapped in symbolism, and sealed beneath stone. A structure that speaks in geometry, in silence, and in blood. Modern tools, X-rays, drones, ground-penetrating radar continue to probe the temple, but it still keeps secrets. Beneath the dust, beneath the obsidian, something waits, not to be solved, not to be conquered, but to be understood. The serpent didn't die. It coiled inward, into the bones of the city, into the myths of a continent, into the shadowed spaces between faith and fear. And it watches still, not to strike, but to remind us of what we were, and what we still might be. Before language, before cities, before gods had names, or kings had thrones, there was rhythm. Long before humans carved symbols or lit fires in temples, they beat time with hands, sticks, and feet. A palm on a hollowed tree, a stone against stone, a foot stomp on packed earth. And in that repetition, something began. Not speech, not melody, but rhythm. The first drum beat wasn't entertainment. It was communication, a signal, a pulse, a presence, something primal that lived between the body and the earth. Archaeologists have found evidence of percussive instruments, over 30 years old simple drums, made from gourds, wood, animal hides. No formal structure, no scales, just vibration, just sound with intent. These early drums didn't exist in isolation. They carried meaning, a warning, a celebration, a ritual. They echoed through forests and savannas, announcing births, deaths, danger, triumph. The drum became an external heartbeat and extension of the human body, audible across valleys and plains. Long before we told stories in words, we told them in rhythm, around fires, beneath stars, in caves where echoes danced along the walls. The drum wasn't an accessory, it was a language. And that language was global. Across Africa, the drum became more than a tool, it was a being. In West Africa, the djembe was carved from a single tree and wrapped in animal skin. Each one was believed to hold three spirits: the tree, the animal, and the maker. It wasn't just played, it was honored. In ritual circles, the drum didn't accompany the ceremony. It was the ceremony. Some drums, like the talking drum, could mimic speech, relaying messages across miles with changes in pitch and tone. Long before the telephone, people were already sending news through forests with nothing but a stick and a membrane. In the Americas, indigenous tribes treated drums as sacred instruments, living entities with their own spirits. The large communal powwow drum, played by circles of drummers, wasn't just music, it was a spiritual engine, a heartbeat shared by the tribe, echoing the rhythm of Mother Earth herself. In Australia, Aboriginal groups used clapsticks and percussive stomping in Dreamtime ceremonies, a mythic, timeless realm where music, land, and creation were one. In the Arctic, Inuit shamans used frame drums to enter trance states, communicating with ancestors and spirits during endless dark winters. Across all continents, rhythm did what language couldn't. It moved through the body. It bypassed logic. It connected souls. The drum unified, in ceremony, in conflict, in survival. Even today, if you hear a drum in the distance, you don't need a translation. You feel it, because the drum doesn't speak in words. It speaks in something older. The drum has always spoken, sometimes in joy, sometimes in grief, and sometimes in command. As civilizations grew, the drum evolved from sacred voice to strategic weapon. It became an enforcer, a commander of bodies, a signal that meant advance, retreat, attack, kneel. In ancient China, massive bow drums thundered across battlefields, their low, resonant strikes guiding soldiers over chaotic terrain. One rhythm meant to charge, another meant to fall back. These weren't background sounds. They were battlefield order sherd, when words were swallowed by wind and fear. In Mesopotamia, temple drums, once used for religious rites, echoed from the tops of ziggurats to rally the people in times of crisis. When war loomed, drums no longer summoned the divine, they summoned armies. In the Roman world, drums didn't dominate the battlefield the way horns or banners did, but they held symbolic weight. In cults like that of Cybele, frame drums were used in rituals that blurred the line between worship and frenzy, a reminder that rhythm could evoke not just precision, but ecstasy. But no civilization weaponized the drum like the Ottoman Empire. Their military bandsmetter were thunder, made music. Dozens of drummers, cymbalists, and horn players would precede the army, unleashing a sonic assault designed to paralyze the enemy before a single sword was drawn. The massive kettle drums could be heard for miles. European soldiers described freezing in terror long before they saw a single Ottoman warrior. Drums didn't just move troops, they moved emotions. They rattled confidence. They broke morale. Even in times of peace, rulers used drums to announce presence. In courts across Africa, Asia, and Europe, drums heralded kings, queens, emperors. Each beat wasn't just sound, it was authority, arriving with force. To beat a drum in royal space was to declare, power is here. And yet, even in the darkest corners of history, the drum found ways to resist. In the Americas, enslaved Africans torn from homelands but not from memory used drums to communicate across plantations. In some cases, they orchestrated revolts. Owners feared the drum's power so much they banned it, but the rhythms endured in secret gatherings, in coded beats, in foot stomps and clapped hands. Because the drum doesn't need permission. It finds a way. Across centuries, across empires, rhythm has remained a weapon not of destruction, but of direction. It tells people when to rise, when to fight, when to follow. Not just in war, but in revolution. As civilizations branched across continents, their rhythms evolved not just in sound, but in purpose, in philosophy, in identity. In the East, the drum became a sacred instrument of discipline, devotion, and precision. In the West, it became a tool of control, spectacle, and structure. Two rhythms, two truths, one shared heartbeat. In India, the drum became poetry in motion. Instruments like the tabla didn't just keep time, they spoke. Every stroke had a name, a sound, and a meaning. To play the tabla was to speak in a language of rhythm, one learned over decades. The drummer wasn't a timekeeper. He was a philosopher, delivering syllables with fingers and palms like verses of scripture. In Japan, the taiko drum emerged as a ceremonial force. Played in temples, on stages, and in battle, it demanded not just musical skill, but physical mastery. The movements were martial. The strikes, explosive. Taiko wasn't played, it was performed. Each thunderous beat a ritual of power, precision, and spiritual connection. In Indonesia, the kendang drum led the hypnotic flow of gamelan orchestras, interlocking rhythms, each precise yet fluid, guided dancers and worshippers through temple ceremonies. The result wasn't chaotic, it was cosmic, harmony by design, chaos held gently by structure. Meanwhile, in the West, drums marched to a different philosophy. For centuries, they were utilitarian, marching tools, military tools, something to signal, to drill, to discipline. In medieval Europe, drums echoed through castles and cities, not as instruments of joy, but as tools of order, the music of hierarchy. It wasn't until the Renaissance and Baroque periods that drums entered formal music. Even then, they remained background forces, supporting roles, thunder beneath the glory of brass and strings. In the East, rhythm was a dialogue. In the West, it was a directive. But both sides understood its power. Whether played with fingers, mallets, or whole bodies, rhythm gave shape to time. It offered a way to measure the intangible, to turn breath into structure, and silence into movement. Because whether it was spiritual or strategic, sacred or secular, the drum always remained the same thing at its core. A way for humans to speak without words. Long before religions built temples, they built rhythm. Before holy books were written, before gods were sculpted in stone, Humans reached for the divine through vibration, through repetition, through the drum. In every ancient faith, every sacred rite, rhythm was not an accessory to the ritual. It was the ritual. In Africa, the drum was not just sacred, it was alive. Among the Yoruba people, the bata drum spoke directly to the orisas, the deities of their spiritual pantheon. Each beat, each pattern, was a coded prayer, a conversation between the physical and the spiritual. Drummers weren't entertainers, they were priests. Rhythm wasn't performance, it was worship. In Hinduism, the drum appears not in temples, but in the hands of the gods themselves. The deity Shiva, in his cosmic dance as Nataraja, carries a small hourglass-shaped drum called the damaru. Its beat isn't random. It's the pulse of the universe, the sound from which creation itself unfolds. One hand holds fire, the other holds rhythm. Together, they sustain the cosmos. In Buddhist traditions, drums are used in chants and meditation ceremonies. The frame drum, struck slowly and softly, guides monks through deep focus, not to stir excitement, but to return the mind. Again and again, each beat is a breath, each strike, a step toward silence. In the indigenous Americas, the drum is often called the heartbeat of the earth. In vision quests, sweat lodges, and healing rituals, the steady beat grounds the spirit, reconnecting the individual to the land, the ancestors, the unseen. Even in Christianity, where rhythm was often subdued, the drum found its sacred voice, especially in African American churches. Gospel rhythms became expressions of faith, power, resilience. A drum behind the sermon, a beat beneath the praise, a force that could lift sorrow and deliver salvation. No matter the God, no matter the doctrine, the drum endured. Because rhythm doesn't belong to one religion, one people, or one continent. It belongs to us all. It reaches into places that words can't touch. The drum doesn't explain the divine. It evokes it. For tens of thousands of years, the drum was solitary. One body, one rhythm, one sound. Then came the machine age and everything changed. The 19th century brought factories, steam, and speed. Urban spaces shrank. Theaters filled. Music needed to grow louder, faster, tighter. And from this pressure, a revolution emerged, not in sound, but in design. The drum kit was born. Not in a lab, not in a studio, but out of necessity. In military and theater bands, each drum had its own player. One on bass drum, one on snare, one on cymbals. But as costs rose and stages tightened, drummers began combining instruments into a single setup, playing multiple pieces themselves. Then, in 1909, a breakthrough. The first commercially viable bass drum pedal. Suddenly, one drummer could do the work of three. A foot could strike low-end thunder while both hands handled snare and cymbal. The modern drum kit had taken its first breath. Over the next few decades, it would grow hi-hats, toms, ride cymbals, cowbells. By the 1930s, the trap set had become a full percussion ecosystem, built for one person. And then came jazz. In the clubs of New Orleans and Chicago, the drum kit didn't just keep time, it danced. Jazz drummers spoke with their kits. They played fills like sentences, crashes like punctuation. Legends like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich turned the kit into a lead instrument. Swing emerged. Syncopation took over. Rhythm was no longer background, it was the story. When rock exploded in the 1950s and 60s, the drum kit grew louder, heavier, and more dominant. John Bonham, Keith Moon, Neil Peart, these weren't just drummers. They were engines. The kit expanded into double bass pedals, splash cymbals, floor toms the size of oil barrels. Rhythm became spectacle. Today, the drum kit is everywhere, from jazz basements to arena stages, from punk garages to gospel churches. It's acoustic, it's electronic, it's hybrid. A single drummer can now trigger loops, samples, synthsol while keeping a groove alive. The drum kit is no longer just a seat behind the band. It's the throne. One person, 10 voices, infinite rhythms. The drum is not one sound. It is many. A global chorus of voices carved, stretched, and struck into rhythm across every culture on earth. Every region, every people, every climate has shaped its own percussive language, and each drum tells a story not just of music, but of identity. In West Africa, the djembe remains the heart of communal life. Sharp slaps, deep bass. It speaks, answers, commands. Played in circles, it becomes a conversation between people, ancestors, and spirits. Alongside it, the dun-dun anchors the rhythm, the heartbeat beneath the voices. In the Middle East, the darbuka goblet-shaped drum delivers tight, fast, intricate rhythms. Used in belly dance and classical Arabic music, its voice is crisp, agile, and eloquent. It doesn't boom, it speaks. In the Caribbean and Latin America, drums tell stories of fusion and survival. The conga, bongo, and timbale carry the blended DNA of African, indigenous, and Spanish heritage. In Cuba, the sacred bata drums are used in Santeria rituals, each size and pattern aligned to specific gods. Drumming here is both musical and divine. In Brazil, the surdo and kika power samba paradas drums that don't just follow rhythm, they push it forward, driving dance through streets, into protests, into festivals that blur the line between resistance and celebration. In India, the mridangam and tabla dominate South and North Indian classical music. Tuned with mathematical precision, they blur the boundary between rhythm and melody. They are not just background, they're conversation, pure and intimate. And then there's the frame drumone of humanity's oldest instruments, found across Persia, Ireland, Central Asia, and North Africa, played with fingers or mallets, simple in form, sacred in function. It spans continents, beliefs, and centuries. Each drum is built from local materials: wood, clay, metal, hide, crafted by hand, tuned by ear, played by memory. They are not just tools, they are cultural signatures, a language of geography, of tradition, of soul. Because while the rhythms may differ, the purpose is the same: to move, to connect, to belong. As the 20th century drew to a close, rhythm faced a new transformation. The world was becoming faster, smaller, wired. Sound no longer needed wood or skin, it could travel through circuits. The beat evolved. It became digital. The earliest drum machines emerged in the 1930s and 40s, basic, mechanical, and crude. But by the 1970s, innovation caught fire. Machines like the Rhythmicon and the Roland CR78 gave musicians programmable beats, steady tempos, infinite repetition. The future of rhythm had arrived, and it came with a plug. Then, in 1980, everything changed. Roland released the TR-808, a machine whose deep kick drum, crisp hi-hat, and snappy snare didn't just replicate drums, they redefined them. The 808 didn't sound real, it sounded new. And it would shape the backbone of hip-hop, techno, house, electro, trap, entire genres born from synthetic rhythm. Suddenly, a beat wasn't bound by skin or space. It could be looped, chopped, reversed, warped. Time itself became programmable. Electronic kits like the Roland V Drumslet live players trigger thousands of sounds with acoustic familiarity. Musicians could rehearse silently. Producers could swap drum kits mid-song. In studios, digital audio workstations Ableton, Logic, Florida Studio put entire percussion libraries at your fingertips. A laptop became a drum. Some feared this would kill traditional rhythm, that the human touch would be lost in a tide of perfect grids and lifeless clicks. But that didn't happen. Instead, rhythm became hybrid. Drummers began blending acoustic and electronic triggering samples while playing live snares. Producers layered machine beats over human grooves. Finger drumming rose as an art form, real-time performance with pads and touch sensors. Machines didn't replace the drum, they expanded it. Now, rhythm was limitless. You could sample a ritual from Mali, loop a tabla pattern, drop a trap hi-hat tall in one track. Cultures once separated by oceans now collided in rhythm. In clubs, in bedrooms, in headphones. The beat continued, not just evolving, expanding. For over 30,000 years, the drum has been with us. Before the wheel, before the written word, before the first city rose from mud and stone, we were already striking rhythm into the world. It began with a hand on hollow wood, a foot stomp in the dark, a heartbeat copied into sound. From that primal gesture came every rhythm that followed: war marches, wedding songs, ritual chants, dance floors, protest chants, neon-lit clubs. Civilizations have risen and collapsed. Gods have changed names. Instruments have evolved. But the drum has never disappeared. Because rhythm is deeper than melody, deeper than harmony. It is the pulse beneath culture, the spine of human movement. It is the one language that doesn't need translation. A toddler in Tokyo taps the same patterns as a grandmother in Ghana. A club DJ in Berlin echoes the same pulse once beaten beside a fire in Siberia. In times of celebration, we drum. In mourning, we drum. In rebellion, we drum. In prayer, in play, in protest, we return to the beat. The drum outlasts empires. It bridges borders. It doesn't care about politics or profit or perfection. It cares only that you listen and respond. Because when we drum, we are not just making noise. We are remembering something. Something older than history. Something that never needed words. The drum remains. And as long as there are hands to strike and hearts to answer, it always will. Before the skyline, before the steel, before the money surged through its veins like electricity, Manhattan was stone, water, and quiet breath. Then came the vertical dream. The island was always destined to be more than land. Its geology-dense bedrock made it perfect for building up, not out. Other cities sprawled. Manhattan ascended. The first real skyscraper? Not the Empire State, not the Chrysler, but the unassuming home insurance building in Chicago, 1,885. 10 stories, steel frame construction, a whisper of what was coming. New York, watching, listened. By the 1890s, it began. The Flatiron Building, a triangle of stone and glass piercing the wind. Then came the Woolworth Building, 60 stories of neo-Gothic ambition, called the Cathedral of Commerce. Its spires weren't religious, they were financial. Skyscrapers weren't just architecture, they were ideology. Capital, ambition, ego made physical. Manhattan became the epicenter of a new architectural arms race. Companies didn't just want height, they wanted presence, dominance. To own the sky, to be seen from every ferry, every bridge, every borough. Then, in 1930, the skyline detonated. The Chrysler Building rose with Art Deco elegancia, stainless steel crown like a sunburst carved from chrome. Its peak was constructed in secret, added in a matter of hours to outdo a rival building. For 11 months, it was the tallest in the world. Then came the Empire State Building. Built in just over a year during the Great Depression, it was not just a marvel of engineering, it was defiance. 102 stories, 1,454 feet. A monument to ambition carved into the sky while breadlines stretched down below. But Manhattan didn't stop. Skyscrapers became Manhattan's fingerprint. Each new tower a glyph of power, some elegant, some brutal, some beloved, some hated. The skyline shifted with the decades. Post-war steel and glass gave birth to international style: functional, minimal, cold. The Seagram Building, the UN headquarters, the black monoliths that defined the corporate aesthetic of the 1960s. Then came World Trade. The Twin Towers rose in the early 1970s, not beautiful, not intricate but massive. They didn't seek to charm the eye, they demanded it. At 110 stories each, they were brute force geometry. Square columns of power. You didn't admire them, you felt them. And then, in 2001, they were gone. The skyline, once a symbol of dominance, became a silhouette of loss. Steel turned to ash, thousands gone. And in their absence, a void that wasn't just physical but psychic. For years, the city wrestled with how to rebuild, not just towers, but meaning. The result? One World Trade Center, a fusion of memory and momentum. 1,776 feet Talon, intentional nod to American independence. Its spire pierces the sky not in arrogance, but remembrance. Now, Manhattan surges forward again. Towers like Hudson Yards, 157, and the so-called Billionaire's Row have emerged, glass needles scraping heaven. Slim, tall, ridiculously expensive. Architecture no longer just for function or ego, but for speculation. Real estate turned into vertical vaults. Homes no one lives in, windows no one looks out from. The skyline has changed, but the dream remains. Because in Manhattan, the sky isn't a limit, it's a metric. To build higher is to exist louder. From a distance, Manhattan's skyline is poetry in steel. But up close, it casts long shadows not just on the streets, but on the soul of the city itself. Behind the glass, beyond the billion-dollar views, a new reality has emerged. The vertical empire isn't just architecture, it's asset, it's exclusion, it's disappearance by design. Take Billionaire's Row, a stretch of super-tall, pencil-thin towers along 57th Street. These aren't homes. They're safe deposit boxes in the sky. Apartments bought as investments, not shelters. Some units sit empty for years, no furniture, no tenants, no light behind the windows. Meanwhile, across the city, families cram into shrinking apartments. Rent skyrockets. Neighborhoods vanish under glass and shadow. The towers promise prosperity, but prosperity doesn't trickle down. It ascends, floor by floor, until it vanishes beyond reach. In Midtown, sunlight used to pour into streets, parks, playgrounds. Now, luxury towers block it. Long shadows stretch across Central Park, where the public walks beneath private wealth. Developers use loophole-laissez rights, zoning tricks, legal contortion stretch buildings to absurd heights, not because they need to, but because they can, because height sells, because height impresses. But what does it leave behind? A hollowed city, a skyline of ghosts, towers that reflect light but contain no life. Architecturally, the supertalls are impressive, engineered with genius, balanced against wind, designed to withstand earthquakes, storms, gravity itself. But ethically, the foundation is thinner. Manhattan has always been a city of contrast, wealth and poverty, legacy and ambition. But the skyline once belonged to people, churches, libraries, offices filled with workers, homes filled with families. Now, the skyline speaks a different language. It says, this view is for the few. This height is not your height. This city isn't yours anymore. Even the construction is a paradox. The towers are built by laborers who will never set foot inside once they're finished. Immigrant workers risking their lives for faceless buyers overseas. Glass walls polished by hands that will never be welcomed through the front entrance. Still, the towers rise. And the city watches. Not because it approves, but because it has no choice. This is Manhattan's new cathedral, not to God, but to capital. Skylines pretend to be permanent. Steel, glass, concrete, they posture as eternal. But cities, like people, forget, and buildings lie. Look at old photographs of Manhattan from a century ago empire state. No world trade, no towers so thin they vanish in fog. The skyline we now call iconic was once imagined, then built, then rebuilt again. Every generation carves its silhouette into the sky, convinced it will last. But the skyline isn't a monument. It's a mirror reflecting who holds power, who gets erased, and who gets to leave a mark. In the 1920s, it reflected ambition and boom. In the 30s, resilience through depression. In the 70s, the towers of finance and trade. In the 2000s, grief and defiance. Today, it reflects accumulated wealth stacked on air. Manhattan's skyline has become more than shape, it's a performance. A spectacle of dominance. A signal not to the world below, but to the world beyond. To foreign investors, hedge funds, real estate syndicates, to anyone with the money to buy altitude. But what happens when the spectacle no longer serves the people who live in its shadow? Public schools are overcrowded, while luxury towers sit empty. Subway stations crumble, while lobby floors shine with imported marble. Generations that built the city are priced out of it. Entire communities, erased not with bulldozers but with zoning permits. And still the skyline gleams. Still the towers rise higher, sleeker, emptier. Memory fades faster at altitude. History becomes harder to hold from 1,000 feet up, but the skyline remembers, not in the glass, not in the concrete, but in the voids, in what used to be there. Look closely, and you'll see the outlines of what once stood. The brownstones of old Harlem, the diners of the East Village, the warehouses of Soho, the art studios, jazz clubs, immigrant enclaves replaced, renamed, forgotten. This is the illusion the skyline sells. That height equals progress. That shine equals success. That permanence can be bought. But the truth is simpler. Towers fall, owners change, shadows move. The skyline does not rise forever. It bends. It breaks. It reflects. And in its reflection, we see not what the city is, but what it's becoming. A skyline is not static. It is not frozen in time. It breathes slowly, heavily, like an organism made of ambition and stone. Architecture is often mistaken for permanence, but no structure, no matter how tall, how strong, how famous, escapes the erosion of context. Cities shift, people move, meaning fades, and what was once revolutionary becomes backdrop, then burden, then relic. Buildings age, not like trees, like myths. What once stood as triumph can become tragedy. What once housed power can be emptied, repurposed, demolished. The city forgets, then rebuilds, then forgets again. Look at the towers that once defined Lower Manhattan. The Twin Towers. For 30 years, they were anchors of the skyline. Unloved by some, feared by many, respected by all. Then, in a single morning, they became absence. And in their place, memory, grief, silence. Now, One World Trade Center rises where they stood, sleek, symmetrical, measured in feet, but also in symbolism. It's not just a building, it's a wound, rebuilt with intention. Elsewhere, towers have disappeared without tragedy, just time. The Singer Building, the original Penn Station, dozens more, once icons, now ghosts, their footprints paved over. Their stories told only in blueprints and forgotten photographs. Because a skyline doesn't belong to architects. It belongs to eras. Each building is a timestamp, stamped into air and shadow. The Art Deco grace of the Chrysler Building, the brutal verticality of the Seagram, the alien elegance of Hudson Yards. Each one speaks to the values of its time. And those values shift. What we once called progress, we now call gentrification. What we once labeled innovation, we now question as excess. The very glass that once symbolized modernity is now seen as sterile, lifeless, elitist. The skyline's language changes, even if the shapes don't. But the city doesn't stop building, because it can't, because it doesn't know how to be still. Architecture is how a city thinks out loud, and Manhattan thinks in towers. So it keeps rising, even as the world below asks harder questions. Who is this city for? Who gets to live in its light, and who remains in its shadow? The skyline lives, but it does not live alone. It lives through us, through the people who walk beneath it, the ones who clean the windows, pour the concrete, pay the rent, take the photos, build the myths, tell the stories. The skyline breathes our breath. And when the buildings crumble, when glass cracks and names fade, what remains is not the height, but the heartbeat. Every city is a story told in layers, brick over stone, steel over brick, memory over silence. They rise, fall, shift, and rebuild, carrying within their foundations not just architecture, but intent. Every street grid, every tower, every plaza is a decision and echo of human design shaped by belief, fear, power, and hope. We build cities to control nature. We build them to reflect ambition. But in the end, what they reflect most is us. Not our perfection, our contradiction. Skyscrapers that scrape heaven but cast cold shadows. Temples of finance next to shelters in collapse. Opulence in the clouds while erosion gnaws at the ground floor. Cities are not clean equations. They are chaos wearing a suit. Yet we keep building. We build to be remembered. We build to be seen. We build because silence feels like erasure, and concrete feels like certainty. But permanence is a myth. The buildings crumble. The names fade. The city forgets, then starts again. And maybe that's the point. Because in the cycle of construction and decay, there's something deeply human. A refusal to be still. A hunger to shape space and call it meaning. To write poems in steel and stone, knowing they'll be erased and writing them anyway. We are not gods. We are not immortal. But we are builders. And through our buildings, through every drumbeat, every tomb, every tower, we whisper to the future. We were here. We stood. We reached. We believed. Not in permanence, but in the echo. And that echo, if you listen closely, is still bouncing between the walls, between the ruins, between the stars. It is not a voice. It is not a song. It is a rhythm, and it never stops.